My mother pushed the wedding invitation back toward me with 2 fingers, like it was something she didn't want staining her hands. "We don't attend events that small, Ione," she said, her tone soft but cutting, the kind that leaves bruises without raising her voice. My father didn't blink. My sister smirked into her water glass. I felt my face burn, felt the humiliation rise like heat behind my ribs, but the rest of me went strangely still, frozen in that moment between wanting to scream and realizing it wouldn't matter. My name is Ione Whitcomb, and that was the night I learned how little my family believed I was worth. I didn't argue. I didn't cry in front of them. I went home and sewed the last beads onto my dress because love deserved celebration, even if my parents didn't think so. They skipped the ceremony without a second thought. Afterward, they treated my marriage like it was a phase, something beneath their attention. Every birthday, every holiday, every milestone, they found new ways to remind me I wasn't the daughter who mattered. And over the years, as I built my business from late nights and borrowed spaces into something respected, something luxurious, something that held my entire life together, they stayed distant unless they needed something. I kept a quiet record of every time they said no, when all I'd asked for was presence. 10 years later, the world had changed. Mine, specifically. My husband and I were planning an anniversary celebration worthy of everything we had survived together, a night curated with precision and heart, something grand and unmistakably ours. The kind of event people whispered about. When whispers of it reached my parents, suddenly they wanted to be involved, to be photographed beside me, to slip back into a story they had stepped out of long ago. What followed wasn't rage or retaliation. It was the moment I learned that dignity, boundaries, and self-worth could be the sharpest, most elegant form of revenge. I didn't destroy them. I didn't expose them. I simply held them to the choices they'd made. And in doing so, I walked into the life they never thought I would build, glowing, grounded, and finally free from their approval. My mother slid the cream-colored envelope back across the table without touching the embossed lettering. We were sitting in their dining room, the one with the chandelier that cost more than my car and the silverware that had been in their family for generations. The room always made me feel small, like I was still a child being corrected for using the wrong fork. "We don't attend weddings that small," she said calmly, like she was commenting on the weather or declining a magazine subscription. The invitation had taken me weeks to design. Simple but elegant, 35 guests, a garden ceremony, everything I could afford while still making it beautiful. Everything that mattered to me and Marcus, my fiancé. My father didn't even lift his eyes from his phone, just sat there, letting my mother speak for both of them like she always did. My sister, Camille, smirked and sipped her water. She was 3 years younger but had always been the golden child. The one who did everything right, married the right kind of man, lived in the right kind of house. Shame flared hot up my throat. My hands trembled slightly as I pulled the invitation back toward me, folding it carefully so they wouldn't see how badly they'd hurt me. "It's our wedding," I said quietly. "Exactly," my mother replied. "And it should reflect well on the family. 35 people in a public garden, what will people think?" My name is Ione Whitcomb, and that was the moment I learned that my parents cared more about appearances than about me. I drove home, gripping the wheel so tightly my fingers ached. The invitation lay in the passenger seat, untouched now, like a rejection letter written in my own handwriting, like proof that I'd been foolish to hope. The drive from their estate in the suburbs to my small apartment downtown usually took 40 minutes. That night, it felt like hours. Every mile between their house and my home felt like a lifetime of being the daughter they tolerated, not celebrated. I'd always been different from Camille. She'd gone to law school. I'd studied design. She'd married a corporate executive. I was marrying Marcus, a high school teacher who wrote poetry and made me laugh until my stomach hurt. She lived in their world of country clubs and charity galas. I'd chosen a life that felt real, even if it was smaller. But I'd never thought they'd skip my wedding. I'd imagined my mother might criticize the venue or my father might make some comment about the budget. I'd prepared myself for judgment, not absence. I sat in my apartment parking lot for 15 minutes before I could move. The evening air was cool through the cracked window. Somewhere nearby, someone was playing music. Life continuing normally, while mine felt like it was crumbling. Finally, I gathered the invitation and my purse and walked inside, each step feeling heavier than the last. I finished sewing the last crystals onto my dress alone at my kitchen table. It was supposed to be the moment my mother and I bonded over lace and tradition. I'd imagined us sitting together, her sharing stories about her own wedding, maybe even getting misty-eyed as she helped me prepare for mine. Instead, the silence around me throbbed. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic outside my window. The dress was simple, ivory silk with tiny glass beads I'd sewn on by hand over weeks of late nights. Each bead represented hours of work, of hope, of believing this day would be special even with our limited budget. I held it up to the light, watching the beads catch and shimmer. It was beautiful. Marcus would love it. Our friends would celebrate with us. It would be enough. It had to be enough. I whispered small reassurances to myself, the way children do when they're scared of the dark. It's going to be perfect. You don't need them there. You have people who love you. But even as I said the words, I felt the absence like a physical weight. My mother's rejection sat in my chest like a stone. My father's indifference echoed in every quiet moment. I folded the dress carefully and placed it in its garment bag, then sat at my table and cried. My wedding day was gentle and beautiful. Warm string lights wrapped around trees. Soft music played by a friend's quartet. Marcus stood at the makeshift altar looking at me like I was the only person in the world. Our closest friends surrounded us. Marcus's parents held each other and cried happy tears. My Aunt Teresa, my mother's sister who'd always been kind to me, flew in from Oregon to be there. But every time a door opened in the garden pavilion, I hoped for my parents. My heart would skip, thinking maybe they'd changed their minds. Maybe they'd realized how cruel they'd been. Maybe they'd show up late with apologetic smiles. They never came. I smiled in photos anyway, laughed at toasts, danced with Marcus under those string lights while fireflies blinked in the darkness beyond. And in the moment, it was perfect. Real, true. But later, looking at the photographs, I could see it in my eyes, that flicker of hurt beneath the happiness. The way I kept glancing toward the entrance, the invisible weight I carried even on the happiest day of my life. Something inside me folded up neatly that day, like a letter no one bothered to read. A part of me that had always sought my parents' approval just closed, not died, just went somewhere quiet and protected where they couldn't hurt it anymore. A week after the wedding, my sister posted a family brunch photo on social media. The whole family gathered around their dining table, the same one where my mother had rejected my invitation. Camille, her husband, my parents, even my grandmother. The caption read, "Whitcomb family traditions, so grateful for these moments." No mention that they'd missed my wedding. No acknowledgement that anything had happened. Just this perfect, curated image of family unity. My mother left a comment beneath it. "So proud of our family. Nothing matters more than these bonds." My stomach twisted as I stared at my phone. They had erased the absence like it had never happened. Like I had never happened. They were continuing their lives, their brunches, their traditions, without even a flicker of guilt or recognition of what they'd done. I screenshot the post and saved it in a folder on my computer. I didn't know why. Some instinct to document, to have proof that this wasn't just my imagination or oversensitivity. Marcus found me sitting on the couch, staring at my phone. "You okay?" "They're pretending everything's normal," I whispered. He sat beside me and pulled me close. "Their loss," he said simply. But it didn't feel like their loss. It felt like mine. My mother called 3 months later, not to ask about the wedding, not to apologize, not to meet Marcus properly. She called to ask why I hadn't joined them for Easter brunch. "We didn't realize you'd be sensitive about something so minor," she sighed when I pointed out that they'd skipped my wedding. Something so minor. I held the phone away from my face, staring at it like it might explain how a mother could say something like that. How my wedding, the most important day of my life, could be dismissed as minor while a holiday brunch was treated as an obligation. It wasn't minor to me, I said carefully. Ione, you're being dramatic. It was just a small ceremony. Not like Camille's wedding with 300 guests and the symphony orchestra. We simply made a choice about where to allocate our time. Allocate their time, like I was a meeting they'd decided to skip. I have to go, I said. Don't be childish about this. Family forgives. I hung up before she could say anything else. Then I sat on my kitchen floor and cried so hard I thought I might be sick. Marcus came home to find me there and didn't ask questions. Just sat beside me on the cold tile until I could breathe again. At Thanksgiving, I made the mistake of attending their family dinner. I'd convinced myself that maybe enough time had passed. Maybe things would be different. Maybe I was being too sensitive, like my mother said. I arrived with a homemade pumpkin pie, following their family tradition. My mother answered the door looking surprised, like she didn't expect me to show up despite confirming I was coming. Inside, the house buzzed with conversation. Camille was there with her husband, talking about their recent vacation to France. My father sat in his leather chair reading the paper. My grandmother held court at the dining table. I walked in, and the conversation didn't pause. Nobody greeted me beyond quick nods. I set my pie in the kitchen and found my parents deep in discussion about Camille's upcoming promotion at her law firm. My mother looked at me, startled, when I sat down at the table, like she genuinely hadn't registered my arrival. My father looked up from his paper. Remind me, what's your husband's name again? Marcus, I said, my voice barely steady. Right, the teacher. I'd told him Marcus's name at least 3 times before. At family dinners, in phone calls, when I'd announced our engagement. But it hadn't mattered enough for him to remember. After dinner, I went to use the bathroom and heard voices in the hallway. My mother was talking to Aunt Teresa, who'd flown in for the holiday. I don't know why Ione insists on being so dramatic about the wedding situation, my mother said, her voice carrying clearly. Her wedding wasn't worth the travel. 35 people in a park. We have standards. Aunt Teresa made a sympathetic sound, though I couldn't tell if she agreed or was just being polite. Camille's wedding was an event. Ione's was. Well, it was sweet, I suppose, in its way, but not something we needed to attend. My knees shook so hard I had to grip the bathroom doorframe. Not something we needed to attend. My wedding. The day I married the love of my life. Not something they needed to attend. That line would burrow into my memory for 10 years. Would replay itself at random moments. Would crystallize everything I needed to know about how my parents saw me. I waited until I heard them move away, then slipped out a side door and left without saying goodbye to anyone. I texted Marcus from the car, and he met me at home with takeout and old movies. We spent the rest of Thanksgiving on our couch, just the 2 of us, and it was better than any family dinner had ever been. The first year of my marriage was quiet and steady. Marcus and I settled into our life together. Small apartment, modest income, big dreams. We were happy in a way that didn't need validation from anyone else. I'd always had an eye for design, for making spaces feel intentional and beautiful. I started taking consulting gigs on the side, designing small events for friends and acquaintances. Birthday parties, anniversary dinners, baby showers. People appreciated my sense of detail, the way I could take someone's story and translate it into visual moments, the way I created atmosphere that made people feel something. My first paid client was a coworker who wanted to propose to his girlfriend. He had a tiny budget but huge hopes. I designed an intimate rooftop setup with string lights, flowers from the farmer's market, and handwritten notes tucked into unexpected places. When his girlfriend said yes, she cried, and my coworker sent me a photo of them together with a message. You made magic happen. Something bloomed inside me, a possibility I hadn't seen before. Marcus encouraged me to take it seriously, to build it into something real. You're incredible at this, he said, watching me sketch ideas at our kitchen table. I started a simple website, took more clients, worked late nights after my day job. My first big breakthrough came a year later. A tech entrepreneur saw my work at a friend's party and asked me to design his daughter's sweet 16 celebration. The budget was more than my entire annual salary. I spent weeks planning, created a garden wonderland with lighting that shifted through the evening, installations that told stories, spaces that flowed like chapters in a book. The party made local news. A style blogger featured it with photos that made it look like something from a fairy tale. The entrepreneur's wife hugged me at the end of the night, tears in her eyes. "You made my daughter feel like a princess. How do I even thank you for that?" Word spread. Referrals came in. Suddenly, I had a waiting list of clients who wanted me specifically. People willing to pay for my particular vision, my attention to the emotional architecture of celebration. I quit my day job. Marcus and I celebrated with cheap champagne and expensive dreams. I called my mother to tell her, hoping maybe this success would make her see me differently. "That's nice," she said vaguely. "Very creative, though I hope you're not taking too many risks financially. Event planning isn't exactly stable work." Not congratulations, not pride, just worry disguised as practicality, judgment wrapped in concern. I hung up feeling smaller than I had before I called. Over the next few years, my business grew steadily. I hired an assistant, then another, formed an LLC, rented actual office space instead of working from our apartment, built a portfolio that spoke for itself. But my family's response stayed frustratingly consistent. In our family group chat, Camille would bring up my career with a weirdly passive-aggressive tone. "I guess Yoni's doing something with parties." She'd write when my grandmother asked what I was up to. My mother would chime in, "Well, it's not stable work like Camille's law practice, but Yoni seems to enjoy it." They still couldn't see me clearly, couldn't acknowledge that I was building something real, something valuable. To them, I was still the daughter who'd had the small wedding, who'd chosen wrong, who didn't quite measure up. Meanwhile, strangers recognized my name. Industry publications called me for quotes. Clients flew me to other cities for consultations. But my parents never asked about any of it, never requested to see my work or attend an event I'd designed. Their disinterest was so complete it almost felt intentional. Marcus would find me staring at my phone after family dinners, trying to process their indifference. "You don't need their approval," he'd remind me gently. "I know," I'd say. But knowing didn't make it hurt less. 4 years after my wedding, a luxury lifestyle magazine featured my work in a 12-page spread. The editor called me a rising force in experiential design, and the secret weapon of those who understand that events are emotional architecture. The article included photos of my favorite projects, quotes about my philosophy, a small bio about how I'd started. It was the kind of recognition most people in my field spent decades working toward. I was 31 years old, and a national publication was calling me a force. My mother sent a text 3 days after the article published. "Interesting." That was it, one word. Not "I'm proud of you" or "this is incredible" or even "can I see the article?" Just interesting. I stared at that text for so long Marcus asked if I was okay. "I think I need to stop expecting anything from them," I said. He pulled me close. "You've been enough your whole life, Yoni, with or without them seeing it." But later, alone, I added that text to the folder on my computer. The growing collection of small cruelties documented proof of their indifference. My real breakthrough came when a major charity asked me to design their annual gala. It was the kind of event that drew celebrities, philanthropists, and media attention, the kind that could make or break a reputation. I poured everything into it, created an experience that told the charity's story through every detail, the lighting, the table settings, the way people moved through the space. The event raised twice their projected donations and got written up in every major publication. After that, everything changed. High-profile clients started requesting me by name. Corporations wanted me for their launches. Wealthy families hired me for milestone celebrations. Investors reached out wanting to back expansion. I formed a boutique company with a small team of talented designers. We became known for events that felt less like parties and more like art installations, like stepping into a story. My husband cheered louder than anyone, celebrating every win like it was his own. My team became like family, people who understood and valued what we were building together. But when I sent my parents a link to the charity gala coverage, my mother replied, "Looks expensive. Hope they paid you well." Not "this is beautiful" or "you should be proud." Just a comment about money. My parents never asked how any of it happened. When my company celebrated its first official year, I organized a small showcase event. Nothing extravagant, just a gathering to thank the people who'd supported us, to show what we'd built, to mark the milestone. I invited my parents, sent a formal invitation with all the details. They declined via text. "We're busy that weekend." The next day, my mother posted a photo from their golf club, her and my father standing with Camille and her husband on the green. The caption read, "Family first. Nothing beats quality time with the ones you love." I stood in my office, holding my phone, and felt something inside me finally, irrevocably break. Not break open, break free. They'd made their choice, over and over, year after year. They'd shown me exactly what I was worth to them, exactly where I ranked in their priorities. And I was done pretending it didn't hurt, done hoping they'd change, done waiting for approval that would never come. My therapist asked me a question that changed everything. What if your parents never give you the approval you're chasing? I sat in her office, the afternoon light slanting through the blinds, and felt the truth of it settle over me. What if they never see you the way you want to be seen? What if they never acknowledge your success or validate your choices? What then? I cried harder than I had at my wedding, harder than I had on any of the holidays I'd spent hoping they'd notice me, cried until my throat hurt and my eyes swelled. Because the answer was clear, painful but clear. I'd been living my life seeking their validation, building my success partially to prove I was worthy of their attention, hoping that if I achieved enough, if I became impressive enough, they'd finally see me. But they wouldn't, not because I wasn't worthy, because they'd decided long ago what role I played in their story. And no amount of achievement would change that narrative. The next morning, I made a promise to myself. I would build a life that didn't require their validation, would measure success by my own standards, would surround myself with people who saw me clearly and chose to be present. I would stop waiting for them to show up. 5 years after my wedding, my company was thriving beyond anything I'd imagined. We had regular clients booking a year in advance, a staff of 12 talented people, a reputation for creating events that people remembered forever. Marcus and I talked about our 10th anniversary over breakfast one Sunday. We'd survived so much together, the pain of my family's rejection, the stress of building a business, the normal ups and downs of marriage. "I want to do something extraordinary," I said. "Something that celebrates everything we've built together, not just the marriage, but the life." His eyes lit up. "What are you thinking?" "An anniversary gala, but not just a party, an experience, something that tells our story with every detail, something beautiful and meaningful and completely ours." We started planning that day, a night worthy of the decade we'd survived and the future we were building. The kind of event that would be mine, finally, not something I was designing for someone else, something for us. Something my parents had taught me I didn't deserve, but that I was going to claim anyway. Word leaked about our plans through industry channels. I mentioned the anniversary gala to a vendor who mentioned it to another client who mentioned it at a charity board meeting. In circles where luxury events were discussed, my name came up. And somehow, through the strange network of wealth and gossip, word reached my parents' country club. My mother called on a Tuesday afternoon. Her voice had that careful, artificial sweetness she used when she wanted something. "Yoni, darling, we heard you're planning some sort of big event." Her interest wasn't curiosity, it was hunger. I could hear it in her tone, the way she emphasized big event like she was testing how impressive it might be. Marcus and I are celebrating our 10th anniversary, I said neutrally. Oh, how wonderful. 10 years already. Time flies. She paused. Someone mentioned it might be quite the affair, several hundred people. It's still being planned. Well, we'd love to hear more about it. Perhaps we could take you to lunch this week. They'd never taken me to lunch, not once in the 5 years since they'd skipped my wedding. But now, suddenly, they wanted to know about my event. I met them at an upscale restaurant they chose, the kind where they knew the maitre d' by name and had a preferred table. My father wore a suit despite it being Saturday. My mother had fresh highlights and designer sunglasses perched on her head. Camille was there too, which I hadn't expected. The whole family gathered, overly friendly, overly curious, overly rehearsed. They asked about the anniversary plans with bright, intense interest. Where would it be held? How many guests? What was the theme? Would there be media coverage? My sister asked directly, will there be press, like photographers from the society pages? My mother wanted to know the dress code. My father asked about the guest list, specifically whether any notable names would attend. They were circling, sniffing out whether this event was worth their attention, whether it would be impressive enough to warrant their presence. I answered vaguely, giving just enough information to satisfy basic curiosity, but nothing specific. Watching them perform interest in my life for the first time in a decade. It would have been funny if it hadn't been so painful. Finally, over dessert, my mother leaned forward and placed her hand over mine. Her touch felt foreign, performative. Ione, sweetheart, we'd love to attend your anniversary celebration. It's been so long since the whole family has been photographed together. It would mean so much to be part of such a special occasion. There it was, the ask. Photographed. Not reunited, not reconciled, not healed. Photographed. They wanted to be in pictures at my impressive event. Wanted to be associated with my success now that it was visible and validated by others. Wanted to slip back into my story now that it was worth telling. My father nodded. It would be good for the family to be seen together, especially at such a prominent event. Camille smiled. It'll be like old times, all of us together. Except it had never been all of us together. They'd made sure of that. I felt something switch inside me, a quiet, powerful certainty settling into place. I'll think about it, I said calmly. My mother's smile tightened slightly. She'd expected immediate agreement, grateful acceptance of their sudden interest. But I'd learned something over the past 10 years. I'd learned my worth. That night, I opened the small wooden box where I'd been storing documentation for years. Every declined invitation, every dismissive text, every skipped milestone, every moment they'd shown me I didn't matter. The wedding invitation they'd rejected, screenshots of social media posts that erased my existence, text messages that minimized my accomplishments, records of events I'd invited them to that they'd skipped. I spread it all out on our dining table while Marcus watched quietly. I wasn't angry. I wasn't seeking revenge. I simply needed to see the truth without emotion clouding it, needed to look at the pattern clearly. The truth was stark, undeniable. For 10 years, they'd been absent. For 10 years, they'd treated my life, my marriage, my success as beneath their notice. And now, suddenly, they wanted access to the celebration they decided was worthy of their attention. What are you thinking? Marcus asked gently. I'm thinking about boundaries, I said, about honoring the truth of what actually happened. He kissed the top of my head. Whatever you decide, I support you. I sat there late into the night, looking at the evidence of a decade, and I made my choice. I sent them a message the next morning, short, clear, measured. After careful consideration, I've decided that attendance at our anniversary celebration will be limited to people who have been actively present in our lives over the past 10 years. Thank you for your interest. My mother replied within minutes, her text appearing in all caps. We are present. We're your parents. I didn't respond. My father called. I let it go to voicemail. His message was brief and cold. "This is extremely disappointing, Ione. We expected more maturity from you." Maturity. They wanted me to be mature enough to pretend a decade of absence didn't matter, to open my arms to people who'd closed their hearts to me. I deleted the voicemail and went back to planning the celebration with people who'd actually earned their invitations. The family backlash was immediate and fierce. My sister wrote a long, dramatic message accusing me of being ungrateful, of holding grudges, of tearing the family apart over one small incident from years ago. One small incident. My wedding wasn't one small incident. It was the culmination of a lifetime of being second best, of being the daughter who didn't measure up, of being loved conditionally. My father called again 3 days later. This time I answered. "You're overreacting," he said without preamble. "Your mother is devastated. Camille thinks you're being vindictive. This isn't who we raised you to be." "You didn't raise me to accept disrespect," I said quietly. "You raised me by example, and the example you gave was that my significant moments don't matter to you. That's not fair. We've supported you. Name one event I invited you to in the past 10 years that you attended." Silence. "I'm honoring the reality of our relationship," I said. "Nothing more, nothing less." The silence that followed was the cleanest break I'd ever heard, like something that should have severed years ago finally snapping free. "I have to go," I said, and hung up before he could respond. Marcus found me crying afterward, but they weren't sad tears. They were relieved. The night of our anniversary gala arrived like a dream I'd been building for months. The venue, a restored historic mansion with gardens that glowed in the evening light, was transformed into something magical. Every detail told our story. The music we'd loved, the flowers from our wedding, photos from our decade together displayed like art, spaces designed for intimate conversation and grand celebration. The guest list shimmered with people who had stood by us through every storm. Marcus's family, my Aunt Teresa, friends who'd celebrated our small wedding, clients who'd become genuine supporters, my team who'd helped build everything we'd created. I walked in wearing a gown I'd designed with the seamstress who had hemmed my wedding dress while I cried from loneliness 10 years ago. She was there too, invited with her husband, celebrating with us. Cameras flashed, not from society photographers my parents cared about, but from people documenting joy rather than status. Marcus squeezed my hand as we entered together. "You did this," he whispered. "Look what you built." I felt whole, not because I'd excluded my parents, but because I'd finally honored the truth. An hour into the celebration, security contacted me discreetly. My parents had arrived, uninvited. They were standing at the entrance gate, dressed in formal wear, insisting they were family and demanding entry. I walked to a second-floor balcony where I could see the entrance. There they were, my mother in an expensive gown, my father in his tailored tuxedo, Camille beside them looking frustrated. They were trying to push past security, my mother's voice carrying even from a distance. "This is ridiculous. We're her parents. She's being childish." Security was following my instructions exactly. Polite, firm, immovable. "I'm sorry, but your names aren't on the guest list. This is a private event." I watched them from above. They looked small. Not because I diminished them, but because they had diminished themselves. Because their sense of entitlement couldn't override the simple truth. They hadn't earned the right to be there. My mother looked up and spotted me on the balcony. Our eyes met across the distance. I didn't wave, didn't smile, didn't cry. I just looked at her steadily, then turned and walked back inside to the celebration. To the people who had chosen me. Inside, surrounded by love and music and light, I gave a short speech. I hadn't planned one, but standing there with Marcus beside me and genuine family all around, the words came naturally. 10 years ago, Marcus and I got married in a small ceremony with 35 people, I began. It wasn't grand or elaborate, but it was real. And the people who showed up that day taught me something important. Family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about choosing to show up. I looked around the room at faces that had proven that truth over and over. Thank you for showing up, not just tonight, but through all the nights that led us here. Thank you for seeing us, for celebrating us, for standing with us. You're the family we chose, and the family who chose us back. People clapped, some cried. Aunt Teresa blew me a kiss from across the room. Marcus kissed my temple and whispered, "I'm so proud of you." For the first time in my life, I wasn't performing strength. I was living it, feeling it in my bones, solid and real and unshakable. My parents never entered that room, not because I shut them out, but because they had walked away from me long before I ever built the doors. And I finally learned to stop waiting at thresholds they'd abandoned. Outside, I heard later, they'd eventually left, driven away in their expensive car, probably already crafting a narrative about my ingratitude, my cruelty, my failure to appreciate their belated interest. But inside, in the light and warmth of chosen family, I danced with my husband and celebrated a decade of building something real. Something that didn't need their approval to be magnificent. Something that was mine. Please like and subscribe too. This channel for more interesting stories like this.